We'd like to continue our program, but please feel free to enjoy your dessert and coffee. I have a bit of a confession to make. I'm a card-carrying member of the Ruth Friendly Fan Club. Each year, I look forward to my discussions with Ruth about candidates for this award, which honors her beloved Fred. But beyond working to protect Fred's legacy, Ruth is a star in her own right. After teaching in Scarsdale for nearly 2 decades, in 1981, Ruth joined Fred to work on his media and society seminars. She held many titles: researcher, editor, producer, executive producer. She was part of a team that won countless awards for a number of PBS series, beginning with a program called The Constitution, That Delicate Balance. She also produced dozens of non-televised programs which Fred moderated for civic, legal, business, and educational organizations. That work eventually became the Fred Friendly Seminars. They were the perfect blend of an educator's love of the teachable moment with the devotion to meticulous journalistic standards. I love chewing on things, grappling with the issues, Ruth once told an interviewer. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to present Ruth Friendly.
I don't know if that was I or not, but thank you anyway. I'll take it, Lee. And you all can be card-carrying members. I like that. Well, today I want to talk right now about an outstanding journalist, a probing interviewer, a superb writer. All of us have benefited from the exceptional work of CBS News reporter Bob Simon. For nearly 5 decades, this award-winning reporter reported from every corner of the globe, from Vietnam to the Falklands, from Bosnia to Bangladesh, from the polar bears in the Arctic to the island of Flores in the Indian Ocean. He started in CBS in 1967, actually a year after Fred left CBS. He was a 26-year-old rookie reporter on the assignment desk. He wanted to be a foreign correspondent. 2 years later, he got his wish, moving to London with Morley Safer as his boss. A terrific hire, Morley said, and so he was. In 1998, he moved to 60 Minutes, and the stories he covered there were wide-ranging. A lover of music, he did pieces on opera. The Met was his favorite. And he did pieces on symphony orchestras. He did animals. He did science. Ebola, searching for a clue and a cure. It was his last program, produced by his daughter Tanya, who produced something else this morning. But Bob is probably best known for his war reporting. His first assignments were in Vietnam. Later, he covered the major conflicts of our times, from Grenada to the Persian Gulf. What distinguishes Bob and his reporting was his knowledge of the history and the politics of the conflict, and his ability to show the many faces of war. He continued to report in war zones even after he and 3 CBS journalists were captured by Iraqi forces. He recounted that experience in his book, 40 Days, the name of the title coming from the time he spent imprisoned. A consummate journalist, he was fearless in his search for the truth, adhering to the meticulous journalistic standards Fred worked tirelessly to promote. Former colleague Dan Rather once described Bob as old school in the style of Ed Murrow: notebook, shoe leather, play no favorites, pull no punches, and go where the action is. Bob's legacy is his body of work that has informed us, educated us, and elevated us. Although we lost him this year, I know that that legacy will inspire journalists for generations to come. Thank you. And Jeff, would you come up here now? Where is Jeff?
So I've been warming up in the bullpen because Tanya was supposed to do this. She did produce something better. So thank you, Ruth, for that. And congratulations to Tanya and Evan. We're so excited for them. Second child, Teddy Robert Garfon. Francoise, congratulations. So thank you so much, Ruth and Quinnipiac, on behalf of Francoise and Tanya, and all of Bob's friends and colleagues, so many of whom are here today. That he's receiving a lifetime achievement posthumously is a difficult concept for us. Difficult to think of CBS News without him. 47 years, Bob covered every kind of story in over 130 countries. Steve Croft said, "I didn't know there were 130 countries." He never would have expected this. We all think of him as the quintessential foreign correspondent, but he wasn't seeking the spotlight, ever. He thought of himself as a regular reporter, and he never inserted himself into the story. Not that he wouldn't have been excited by this today. And honored and proud, Ruth, particularly this award in Fred Friendly's name. Bob joined CBS, as Ruth said, soon after Fred left, about a year. But he immediately felt at home in the place that Friendly and Murrow had built, where important stories were covered and good writing was valued, where it wasn't considered work as much as it was considered a calling. He modeled himself after the gentleman correspondents Friendly and Murrow had taught or inspired: Cronkite and Severide and Collingwood, Perrault and Safer. They were his heroes. During his career, he didn't always feel at home at CBS, as we went through our peaks and valleys as an organization. But the last place he landed, 60 Minutes, he was as comfortable as he was with the first. And there's a good reason for that: Fred Friendly. In the 16 years that Fred was at CBS, only 2 of them were as president. But if he had not been president, we would not have had 60 Minutes. At the time Don Hewitt was executive producer of the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite, the first EP of the half-hour program. But Fred Friendly becoming president was the worst thing that ever happened to Don Hewitt, because Fred fired him. He said, "We're going to send you off to special projects, Don." First he thought I was promoted, but his wife later told him, "He just fired you, Don." Fred and Don did not like each other at all. Though I heard Don say many times he learned more from Fred Friendly than anybody else in his life. And they became friends, eventually. But that's how 60 Minutes came to be. Don was sent to special projects, and he came up with the idea for this new program. And Don spent the rest of his life trying to prove that he understood what Fred Friendly stood for, and tried his heart out to keep it alive at 60 Minutes. We cover what's important, and it's our job to make it interesting. We choose our words carefully, always understated rather than overstated or hyped. We work hard on every line, never wasting a word or an opportunity to share an observation with the viewers, without ever underestimating their level of intelligence and without ever pandering to them to get their attention. There were values and standards that Don drilled into us that he'd learned from Fred Friendly and Ed Murrow. And Bob represented all of that more than almost any other reporter at CBS News, which is why he felt so at home when he came to 60 Minutes, and why he was the perfect fit for the Fred Friendly vision of what a correspondent should be. He was a writer, but his brilliance was also his ability to put everything he covered into context, especially historical context, helping the viewer better understand what had unfolded before our cameras. He was understated, elegant, thoughtful, articulate, unaffected, easy, and cool. I worked with him as his editor for almost every story he did for the last 20 years, but the one I remember most was when we were together in Hong Kong. He just arrived and he said, "Let's go check out that market where they sell the live animals." I said, "Great, I'll get Vim," who was our cameraman. He said, "No, let's just go have a look." He wanted to experience a place, to feel it, to know it better, and inevitably, that's how local flavor and context ended up in his writing. I think it's that part of Bob that teaches us all something. He had a natural curiosity and a wonderful enthusiasm for what we do. He never, ever took it for granted, always raising his hand, ready to go anywhere in the world. And he was always come back with the goods. Thank you.
This is a busy day for me. And before I go any further, I want to say thank you, Quinnipiac, for this wonderful, wonderful lunch. Thank you, President Leahy. There are more. Thank you, Dean Camlett and Lynn Bushnell and Carl and Natalie, with your team that are so stalwart and make this such a memorable day, gathering us all together for the Fred Friendly First Amendment Award, honoring journalists and remembering Fred in such a meaningful way. If Fred were here, and this year happens to be the 100th anniversary of his birthday, yeah, wow. I think that he and our awardee, Richard Engel, would have bonded quickly. Off the top of my head, I can think of a few traits that they have in common. I'll start with one that affected both of them profoundly as they grew up. It was dyslexia. The word wasn't even in the vernacular when Fred was in elementary school in the 1920s. It was unbelievable for Fred. Spelling was ungraspable for him, and math was impossible. His mother despaired, not having a clue what the problem was. And Fred then wondered what he would ever be able to do in life. Well, we know what happened with that. Move forward about 60 years, and there is Richard Engel having a similar miserable time with the academic life at Riverdale School, just a few blocks up from where I live, had I but known. Anyway, it was enough to make anyone frustrated and miserable. possibly lose one's confidence. About arithmetic, Richard once said, "I would add 5 plus 5 and get Nebraska." There was no way that he could meet the goals that his teachers set for him. When Richard broke out of the confines of the academic life of school, a range of his talents began to emerge. He became a leader in a survival wilderness camp. That'll build confidence. And he was an exchange student for a year and went over to Italy and discovered he could master a foreign language, Italian. I think he has about 7 languages in his repertoire now: Spanish, Egyptian Arabic, and several Arabic dialects. Not bad. Richard worked a bit as an unpaid journalist intern for CNN and immediately realized that a desk job was not for him. Graduating Stanford in 1996, he decided to head for Cairo, where he somehow sensed the next stories would emerge. As he put it, what he wanted in life was the privilege of riding the train of history rather than watching it pass by. And he really rode that train. For about 4 years, he did freelance work for almost everyone: BBC, Public Radio International, ABC, USA Today, Reuters, and others. Then he was in the right place at the right time, if you're a journalist. It was Baghdad in 2003, when the US began bombing Iraq. Engel was freelancing for ABC and then continued the coverage of the Iraq War as NBC's primary foreign correspondent. When other journalists left, Engel stayed. He was the only American correspondent to remain in Iraq for the entire war. Becoming NBC's chief foreign correspondent, he moves around the area with ease, knowing and understanding those countries: Egypt, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, Turkey, Syria, Nepal, Jerusalem, and beyond. I don't know, was dyslexia something that gave these two guys, Richard and Fred, an extra push to constantly excel? Let me mention a few other traits that I think these two share. Being natural storytellers, crackling with energy and intensity, having a passion for reporting, being doers with a fire in the belly and an unlimited reserve of stamina. These traits came through to me as I watched many of Richard's pieces this past month. Risk never deterred him. He says it was calculated risk, but I cringe at Richard's risk-taking. If I were his mother, I think I might turn off the TV. But I'm not, so I watched. I watched as he left Turkey, sneaking with 3 others in his team over the Syria border into Kobani, and there were no foreign journalists there. And at the time, ISIS had claimed that it had taken over 90% of the city. Was that true? Engel wanted to find out and get an accurate picture. He joins a soldier. She's carrying a large machine gun, and there she is, telling him when to keep down and telling him when to run. One hears the shooting in the background. Richard communicates the spirit of those defending their city, the tragedy, the wreckage, the political and the military obstacles, the dilemmas. It's complicated. Fred used to say that the job of the journalist is to explain complicated stories. That's what you do, Richard. Explain complicated stories, at times risking your life. Your reporting is gripping, informative, illuminating, and we thank you for it. You honor us today in accepting this award. Congratulations from all of us. And if Fred were here, he would be cheering you on, and he would give you all the time you wanted on air, which he might get fired for, but he would be cheering. Congratulations again.
Well, this has been an amazing week for me. Thank you, Ruth. If I could bottle this moment right now, as some of you might know, I was just married last week. We're having a baby. I'm getting this tremendous honor. There's so many of my friends and colleagues out here joining us today. So it is just an exciting time. Getting married, by the way, is really the start of this next great adventure for me. I used to be the guy who lived out of a hotel, basically hotel rooms, my apartment. I used to throw away all the food in the fridge before I left. I had the same Christmas tree up for 2 years running. So this is a very different time. So we will see how it goes. Thank you for this wonderful honor. Fred Friendly was obviously a famous journalist, an advocate for free speech, an academic, and also, as Ruth mentioned, famously dyslexic. And I am also dyslexic, and when I was a kid, I had real terrible troubles in school. My grades were poor, my behavior was even worse. I got into a lot of fights. My self-confidence was basically zero. And Ruth says it was very similar for Fred. And I actually remember I had a fight, physical fight, with one of my teachers. I wrestled her to the ground, and she did not appreciate it. And I doubt that she or any of my teachers back then thought that I would ever be standing in front of anything but a judge, not a podium like today. So it is a great honor. Fred's turning point came when he first went into journalism. He found something that he could succeed at, something that he was good at, and then when he became a sergeant in World War II. For me, it was that survival camp. I was sent out into the woods with a gun and no food and told to come back in a week. And it went well, and I loved it. And I came back with this kind of confidence that, if I can do that and survive and even excel, then maybe math class isn't quite so intimidating after all. And I think if any of you have dyslexic relatives, children, if you put them in a situation that is above their level and has real consequences, and they succeed, the confidence that they get from this can really change their life. Just on a personal note, I'm becoming quite a family time for me. So today's lunch, this award, is about the First Amendment, which is, I think, the most basic and emotional of all human rights. I remember when Saddam Hussein was thrown from power, and Iraqis were telling me that they were happy, not because they could suddenly vote, but because they could suddenly express themselves. They could suddenly speak. And I was in North Korea and listening to people talk, and every sentence seemed to start with some reference to the dear leader. And I remember looking at them and thinking how maddening it would be to have to speak like that and have to eventually, because propaganda does win, to start thinking like that. And I thought, there's nothing more important than our contributions to defending free speech, to making it a principle that we have to if necessary, fight for, to preserve. And on the surface right now, it seems like we live in an era of unrivaled free speech. But do we? By all possible logic, censorship should be dead. With the internet, I thought censorship would be dead, because it sort of made sense to me. There were once just a few sources of information. States, parties, religious groups, they controlled the messages. And the masses, the people, the audience, They could either accept it or not, or they could try and read some underground newspapers or underground handbills at great personal risk. But those were really the only two options. Now, there are many, many sources, almost limitless sources of information. So by all logic, it should make sense that censorship should be over. But it isn't. Censorship is alive and well. State-controlled media is thriving. Just go to Russia and ask people what they think about the conflict in Ukraine, or go to Egypt and ask about the former president, or go to Turkey and you'll see, or actually you won't see, the dozens of reporters and media activists who are behind bars. Modern censorship, it seems to me, works in two ways. The first is very brutal and very simple. When you write things down, you leave digital fingerprints. And modern states and their favorite corporations have become very good at tracking down those digital fingerprints and hunting down their critics, which is something that didn't happen in the past. And a group, Reporters Without Borders, said that singled out Bahrain, China, Iran, Syria, and Vietnam as enemies of the internet. But the truth is, very few countries don't engage in online censorship and online surveillance. The other modern form of censorship is far less blunt and I think is actually quite ingenious. It tries to shape the chaos of the social media. Because social media right now it's chaotic. It's a bombardment of little bits of information, of little facts, little lies, little half-truths. And every minute, there are millions of these data points floating around. Some are true, and some are deliberately planted by those who wish to manipulate the truth. And I think in this day and age, I think it's important to realize that just because there are more sources of information, it doesn't mean there is more truth. In fact, I would say that the truth is harder now to find and easier to hide amid all the noise. And I see our jobs, all of our responsibility in this digital age as seeking out the truth and separating it from the chaos and listening to see if we can hear the music that is hidden amid the cacophony. And we have to be brave enough, frankly, to accept that truth, even if it goes counter to what we think we know. I had a chance recently to test out my own commitment to this principle. 2.5 years ago, I was kidnapped in Syria, along with some of my closest friends and colleagues. It was a really nasty experience, as you could probably imagine. Held, bound, blindfolded, assuming we were going to die, expecting we were going to die. And we thought we knew what happened. But a few months ago, another news organization raised some questions about the identity of our kidnappers. So 2.5 years later, we did what reporters do. We went back and reinvestigated. And it turned out that our kidnappers were members of one side of the Syrian conflict posing as the other. So we updated our story, even though it meant reliving a truly horrible experience. And I was happy to get to the bottom of the story, and I was really angry, even angrier, I would say, than the people who had initially, people who held us, people who kidnapped us. And it made me remember, as I was writing these comments, something that Bob Simon said at an event similar to this, in that he enjoyed later in his career doing stories about animals, primarily because the animals never lied to him. And in the Middle East, where I do most of my reporting, and the region that Bob covered for so long, unfortunately, lies are a very common courtesy. But I don't think I'm ready yet to give up the Middle East for the animal kingdom. But we will see. And I feel very connected to Bob. I'm so sorry that he's not here. My deepest condolences to his family, my deepest congratulations to his daughter. It must be a difficult but also moment to reflect and celebrate today, so I congratulate her. But I feel connected to him in other ways. Not only that I'm working as well in the Middle East, I'm working with Ben Plesser, his former producer, who is now, we're working together. So there is a degree of, really 2 degrees of separation in this business. And I'm working with fabulous producers, Madeline Herringer, Jamie Novograd, other people who are totally dedicated to this. And one thing that hasn't changed since Bob Simon began his reporting, or when Fred Friendly was doing his reporting, is the importance of teamwork. and Fred Friendly and Murrow were perhaps the most famous team in the news business. And I hope, I can only aspire that maybe we'll be the next great team, or at least we can try. So thank you very much for this wonderful honor and for being here.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you all for coming on behalf of President Leahy and Chairman Howard and Ruth Friendly and all the faculty and staff at Quinnipiac University. We thank you for coming and helping us celebrate the extraordinary work of these two journalists. Have a good afternoon.